So Tom, I've got a weird thing going on already that I've heard you talk about on your podcast, which is when you interview someone that you've already listened to, and then suddenly you've heard this person's voice a bunch of times, and now here they are in your ears talking to you. So I've got a little bit of that going on. It's a little bit discombobulating, but I'm sure we'll get through. Before we get into talking about you and the podcast and what's going on there, I just want to kind of talk about, ask you a few questions about the main question is, where did your mental health journey start? The tagline to your podcast, well, there's two, obviously. There's I Thought I Was Proper Mental, and the other one is Normalising mental health conversation, open and honest mental health conversations by having open and honest mental health conversations, which I think is going to work perfectly over here because it's exactly what we do. We just don't put it in as nice a snappy tagline as you do. We do that. We just don't say it. So it's good to have someone else that's doing that same thing and doing it to such an amazing level as well. I'd be very honest. I joke on social media of being a rival podcast. Mine's not in your league, but I'm okay with it. So. Yeah, where was the start for you? What was the kind of start of your personal mental health journey?
Oh, mate, well, thank you very much for those kind words. It's very, very appreciated. And you're doing yourself a disservice there as well, Dave, but we'll get into that later. But
I'm good at doing that. Hey, look, I just had to write a really big reason as to why I should win a National Diversity Award. And don't get me wrong, I look at the list and I'm like, wow, I've done some good stuff. But at the same time, I was like, I didn't enjoy writing that. I enjoyed reading it back though.
Yeah, it's a weird thing, right? Just kind of celebrate yourself and stuff like that. It's something I've been working up, risk of going off on a tangent, but I've been working on in my own therapy, right? And I'm very bad at taking compliments. It makes me feel uncomfortable. And my therapist always, to get me to kind of lean into that discomfort, she says, if someone tells you something that, says, oh, I really like you, then ask them, why do you like me? What is it? Like, get specifics. And I really, really struggle. It's a funny thing, like hearing nice things about yourself or saying nice things about yourself or saying them and meaning it is probably the hardest thing.
Yeah, 100%. And to go on a tangent from your tangent, I was the same about compliments. I'm okay with it now. We actually have a little button on my stream that has a Uno reverse card, and that says no you, but we have a little S on the end, so it says no us, because we figured out the best way to enjoy a compliment is to, instead of knocking it back at the person and saying no you or oh no whatever, is actually it's more comfortable to accept it after you do it one or two times. That discomfort around compliments, just saying, oh, thank you, that's really nice of you to say so, moves the conversation on and forward so much faster and easier and more comfortably than actually fighting against it and doing the feigned humility thing. It's interesting.
Yeah, it's true. It's a good point. I'll have to start bearing that in mind. Yeah. But so my mental health journey is kind of like a two-parter, really. I got very unwell after the birth of my son in 2016. And at the time, I had no idea that I had been struggling with my mental health for quite a while up until that point. Most of, through my teenage years, certainly, maybe even before that. And I had no idea because I didn't really know what this stuff was. And I didn't know that everything in my life was basically a distraction from sitting with myself.
Yeah.
And so, like my son came along 2016 and I broke, the wheels came off. And I always describe it as like a leak in the basement, and it just been dripping away. And then something as big as becoming a dad, that just burst the pipe. And I didn't have any reserves or tools or anything left to kind of cope with that massive, massive change. And so I was quite poorly after that, and I didn't really know what was happening. So I pretended that everything was fine, that old chestnut, and kind of muddled through like that for a little bit. Things got to the point where I was kind of like leaving the house, threatening to take my own life and things like that. And it all got a bit messy. And then that led me to starting therapy. And I kind of got a bit of a handle on it, rather than understanding everything or working to get better. I just managed to get my head above water and thought, well, I can carry on pretending now. I can stay like this. And I managed to do that for about another 2 or 3 years. And then we get to the end of 2020, kind of October-y time then. And something just snapped in me again. And it was a lot worse that time. And I couldn't I couldn't even pretend anymore. I just couldn't hold things together. I was just broken by it. And yeah, from then more therapy and medication and all the stuff that kind of that I use to get me back on my feet. And yeah, that's kind of how it happened for me. Really, it's always really weird because lots of stuff happened, but then also in between that stuff was also quite good sometimes, and it all just gets a bit murky. Trying to put it in order is really, really weird. Trying to like make sense of the ups and downs and so yeah, I haven't found one of them nice taglines to sum it all up yet, Dave. I just kind of waffle that speech at you.
Yeah. Well, so what was it that led to you deciding, okay, let's start a podcast then?
I suppose when I realized that if I was going to get better, if I was going to, I couldn't keep breaking and putting a plaster on it and pretending I was okay. I couldn't put my wife through it anymore. I couldn't put my kids through it anymore. And I was like, I'm going to have to work at this. I'm going to have to get better. And I realized that I'd been not being very truthful about my mental health for a long time. I'd been pretending everything was okay. I've been playing things down. I'd go to therapy, and I'm a good talker. I'm an intelligent guy. I'd dance with my therapist, and I'd say all the right things and tick all the right boxes, and we'd leave. And I'm sure my therapist was thinking that was an interesting session, and I'd be like, "God, I blagged it," like I got through it without having to say anything. One of my
remind me about I've got an analogy for that, but remind me in a minute, or I'll try and remember.
We'll come back to it. Yeah. But yeah, I realized that I was going to have to start to be more open about this stuff. And I made a conscious decision. So I'd been off work for a few months, and I'd bump into people that I know through my work, and they would say like, "Oh, where have you been?" Or, "When are you coming back to work?" And, they'd ask me if everything was okay. And rather than just going, yeah, I'm fine, and brushing it under the rug, I started saying to people, I've not been doing very well. My mental health has been in a really bad place, and I've been trying to get well, and sort of be more honest about it. And I was amazed at the response. I always thought people would be, immediately having me sectioned and whisked away and phoning Childline on me kids and all that sort of stuff. But people were really cool as a rule, and the amount of people that were like, "Oh, I don't know, my sister has anxiety," or, "My brother died by suicide," and I just end up out of nowhere in these really deep conversations, like in the line at Costa or something, just speaking openly with people. And I'd always come away from it just absolutely just bouncing,
Yeah.
And I'd feel really, really good from connecting with other people on that level after years of not connecting with anyone at all. And I started thinking I could have done, where was these type of conversations? I'd never heard people talk like that. Where was this 4 years ago? And I went looking for these conversations, and there's loads out there, and it's great, but none of them ever suited me. There wasn't working class voices. There wasn't people who were just everything was just so posh and so polished, particularly at that time. You go back to 2016, 2017, it was all like celebrity podcasts about mental health. And without sounding cynical, it's usually, just before the book comes out. And I'd never heard myself. It felt like something separate. I was like, this is not what I'm going through. So I suppose, I just wanted to start having these conversations for the me of 4 or 5 years ago could hear, and maybe kind of find some solace in it, or some answers, or just the words to be able to describe what was happening, because I didn't even have the words. And now I say to people, you can borrow the words of my guest. If you don't know about your experience and something rings true, you can borrow that phrase, because once you've got a phrase to start talking, you'll find your own words. It's just getting the conversation going in the first place.
100%. I can vouch for that as someone who, I put content out daily, and listening to your podcast, I went and listened to your guests. One thing I found really bizarre is we've got such little overlap with our guests. I think Jake, for Chasing the Stigma, Jake Mills, there we go. Couldn't remember his surname for a second. I think that's the one guest that I think I've seen on both of our lists. But when I'm listening to your podcast, a lot of times I'm like, oh yeah, that reminds me of that thing that I was wanting to say this, and you can riff off what other people are doing, and you can talk about it. And I do that as a content creator, as someone who literally, my job is to write and produce mental health content. That is actually my full-time job, not just a podcast. I work in the NHS doing that in my day job. And things like those conversations on your podcast and a few other places like the Richard Nichols podcast, they're little sparks for me. And if I go ages with just sitting with my own thoughts and listening to music in the gym or whatever and not listening to other people's conversations, those thoughts dry up in me quite easily. So there's absolutely no shame in taking someone else's thoughts and then putting your own spin on it or riffing off of it. And I think, podcasts are a fantastic thing for that. I obviously didn't promote my podcast well enough because I had a nice Scouse working class voice on a mental health podcast around that same time. But so what was the start? How did you start it? Like, did you do solo shows or did you have guests on straight away? Like, and what were like the thoughts at that point where it's like, okay, was there any doubt? Was there any imposter syndrome? What was going on?
The first few episodes I did with a friend of mine. I've got a pal who runs a local mental health charity. They're called Running Head First. They do lots of physical activity-based mental health support in our local community. Excuse me. And I originally, he was the only person, his name's Chris Redmond. He's a lovely bloke. And I used to talk to him a lot. I know him from like the gyms and stuff that we both worked in. And I used to talk to him a lot about mental health because he was very open about his promoting his charity. And I'd never really heard anyone speak like that before, like not anyone I knew. So I originally reached out to him and said, look, I want to do something. I don't really know what I want to do. Could we just have a chat and record it or film it? And we'll just bung it on YouTube and just have a go, just like see what it is or what it could be. And I kind of had this idea really, because when I was poorly, I'd stay up all night, like Googling, what is wrong with me and what is depression and how do I know if I'm depressed, and I'd look everywhere. And I kind of had this really romantic idea that, someone who really needed to hear that type of conversation would stumble over it and be like, this is it. Now I understand my mental health. And so we just started like just chatting really and recording them. So we did one and it felt like quite cool. And he was like, we should do it as a podcast rather than a YouTube thing. And I kind of really didn't want to. He kind of like talked me into it really. And then it went from there. We got a couple of guests on. He had a connect. One of our first guests was Alex Hay, who plays for Tranmere, who used to play for Tranmere back in the day, who's been very open about his mental health. So like straight away, we had like someone who played like high level football and, it was really cool. It was like an interesting thing. Yeah. But no imposter syndrome. I never thought anyone would listen, to be honest. I really thought it would be nothing. I felt a bit bad having guests because we're like, I hope you've got nothing to promote because no one's going to hear it. Yeah. So yeah, I never worried about anything. I just assumed like no one would listen. And I'd only been like 2 or 3 months post breakdown by then. I was still learning to talk about my mental health. And I wanted to, just learn how to do it and learn from other people. I didn't understand my experience. I didn't know what had happened. The more people I talk to, the more I'll understand it. That's kind of how I do consume knowledge. That's kind of one of my systems, how I work. So there was part of it for that really, for me to explore. It's quite selfish reasons, I suppose, once we got up and running. It was a lot of fun, and I really enjoyed doing it. I knew early on, we did it 2 or 3 times, and I was like, this is sick. And but then Chris was like, well, yeah, it's kind of all right. It takes up a lot of time, doesn't it? And I was like, yeah, I know, but I really like it. After like 5 or 6 episodes, he was like, I can't do it anymore, man. Like, it's just, I haven't got the time. I'm running a charity. Yeah. So I kind of went solo with it from then. But without his push, I never would have done it, to be honest.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's good that you got that in the first place. Speaking of the time, I am totally intending to have this one out tomorrow, which means and with it being a video as well. So, good luck with that, Dave, because I was supposed to record a solo episode at the weekend, and I did everything but that. But hey, it happens. I want to ask some questions about like the guests and the experience, but the thing I'm most interested in is how have you changed as a result of 125 episodes and and interviewing that many people? How has it changed you?
I really understand my own mental health and the mental health of others, I suppose. How's it changed me? It's a really, really good question. I suppose there's 2 things really that jump out to me. And one is like compassion, right? Because I don't know what it's like to have an eating disorder. or to experience psychosis, but I've spoken to people who have. And one of the things that always jumps out at me, and I'm sure you'll relate to this, Dave, is that we all have different things to deal with. We all break in different ways. It tends to be the same stuff that spills out, right? So whether it ends up being OCD or whether it ends up being anorexia or whatever, you drill down and down and down, and it's the same emotions that we can't deal with and express, and the same feelings about ourselves and the world around us. And so, like, that was a massive realization to me. So you're like, hang on, this stuff isn't separate. Mental illness doesn't bring anything into the party. It takes whatever's at the party and kind of like, feeds it steroids. It's so that was big. So having compassion to other people, and it's made me a very compassionate person. I used to be quite an angry person. I didn't have a lot of compassion, Dave. I used to, not a lot of patience with people, and all of that is a projection of how I felt about myself, right? I hated myself, so I hated everyone else too, because it was easier to say, oh, I hate people, rather than it was to say, I hate me. I didn't know how to be myself around other people. It made me feel bad about me. Compassion is huge. That's a big one. And in some ways, it's kind of made me quite a bit more brave. So now I'll just like have a go at stuff, because you can only speak to so many people who have written a book before you realize, hang on, the only difference between me and them is they sit down and did it. Like my book. I
didn't want to be called out like this today.
But my book might not get published like their book did, and it might not sell copies. But the fact is, by finishing one, and I say that for so many you meet someone who's like directed a film that's done really well, and they just chose to be a director, and they learned how to do it, and they made a few rubbish ones, and then they made a good one, and you kind of, that's something that's big for me. So now I'm much more about like, well, I'll just do it. If I want to try and write something and pitch it to a newspaper, I'll have a go. And, most of the time they say no, but I'll still have another go.
Yeah, I've got to be a little bit better at that, to be honest, because I've been meaning to message you for a long time. And it was the day that you put the 125th episode. Here's a chunk of things that I've learned over making 125 episodes. And I'm like, I love that summary. I love what you'd written, and I was like, it's like, I've been wanting to do this for ages. Why don't I just do it? And I did it. And then a few days later, obviously, I messaged you saying, like, where do you get your guests from? Because obviously, as I said, I looked through your guest list, and there's a few people on there I actually really want to talk to as well, like TJ Power, the neuroscientist. Like, I like really want to like. And the thing is, I go through. I mean, I have bipolar disorder and ADHD, which both react this way. I go through. I'm either messaging nobody or I'm messaging everybody. And then like literally after I messaged you and you said yes, and I was looking through your list and stuff, instead of messaging a bunch of people to ask for guests, I wrote for the first time ever a list of reasons why I should be on a podcast. Like, because I think that a lot of people message me and say, can I come on the podcast? And I'm like, okay, well, what do you want to talk about? And they just go, I don't know, mental health. And I'm like, give me more than that. Like, because if someone messages me and says, here's what I want to talk about and here's my experience with it, that person's pretty much getting a yes. If the person's already done that. And I'm like, I know that about me, but I'd never done it myself. So I did it and I wrote it. And then I sat there and I was with the National Diversity Awards, I looked there and I'm like, I've achieved loads of these things. And why did I never stop to appreciate this? But I need to be a lot more bold with that, because your reply, I was expecting some sort of golden egg or something in that reply that I'd never even thought about. And yours was like, I just find their email address and message them and ask. And I'm like, it's that simple. You can just ask people. It's like, you don't need to go to 46 networking meetings and buy them cupcakes. It's like, you can just go into their email and ask them. And it's, I have one day a year where I do that, and I do it to like 20 people. And I've got to really stop doing that, because I end up with this either swathe of guests all at one point or none. It's an interesting thing. Whilst it's just popped into my mind, when you were talking about winning at therapy before, the analogy I needed to remember. I used to wear glasses when I was a kid, and I used to try and win at the eye test. And it took me until I was about 14 or 15 to realize, thankfully, the optician would always call you out while you're there, like squinting, trying to get that bottom line. They'd know you were straining to read that, even if you got it right. But the thing is, I wanted to win. the eye test so badly, but actually by winning at the eye test, you lose, because if the optician didn't call you out on it, you get the wrong pair of glasses. And the same with therapy. If you like give your therapist all the stories and tell them what you think they want to hear, you might win that session, but you're losing at therapy if they don't call you out on it. And it's something that's come up with my community a bunch of times. So I thought that I'll put that in there, because I'm back in therapy myself at the minute and I love it. But the honesty is massively important, and it's I'm trying to win long term at therapy, which is I understand me and I understand the layers beneath the layers that I've been playing with for the last 41 years. You know, it's like I know these layers. The therapist's now helping me get to these ones, which is good, and that's the mentality of it is winning.
Yeah, man. Yeah, I dig that. I like that analogy. I like it a lot. You know, it's funny, isn't it? Like I knew that something was really, really badly wrong, and I knew that my behavior wasn't right, but I didn't know what it was. And I thought, as soon as someone puts a name on this, I've got that label for life, and I'm going to have to deal with it. And I didn't want to deal with it, because the idea of dealing with it was really fucking scary.
Yeah.
So even though my life was just a mess, it was my mess, and I knew every inch of it. I could find my way around it, and I've kind of gone, I've made it this far. I've carried this heavy bag for this amount of time. I don't want to put it down and have a look in it. I'd rather just keep carrying it.
Yeah.
But it got to the point where I just wasn't strong enough to carry it. So I was dodging. I didn't want to say. I didn't want to be told that something was wrong with me, because then you've got to try and fix it, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's such a kind of like male way of trying to do it, isn't it? It's like, I'm going to carry this bag for as long as I possibly can, because I can't put it down. And so I can't put it down for 5 minutes. And then the bag's there sneakily saying in your ear, yeah, if you can't put this down for 5 minutes, I'm going to make you have to put it down for 5 months or 5 years. You know, it's like, it's sooner or later, you're going to have to put that thing down. And by trying to get an extra 5 minutes now, it's like, what's the cost of that long term? And yeah, I can relate to that a lot. I mean, I can relate to a lot of the things you've said today, a lot already. In terms of the communication, like, so when I think about myself in this, when I was as a communicator first episode years back, whenever it was, I'm like, okay, I wrote down all my questions, and it became the most wooden and predictable episode ever. For about 5 or 6 episodes. Then I sacked off questions entirely, and like I had to figure out how to be a host. Sorry, I actually think I'm better at being a guest, and I've done a lot less time being a guest than I've done being a host. But I'm still figuring it out. For you, how have you changed as a communicator in that time?
It's finding that balance. It's funny you mentioned that. You know, like there's how much prep do you do? Like, I'd never turn up with no prep, because I think that's like, it's a little bit disrespectful, and it would also make me feel, it makes me feel comfortable. You know, if I was interviewing you and we got to a point and it started getting a little bit like that, then I've got my notes and I can grab something. I can just
never going to go like that with me ever. If anything, you might be like, Dave, what question are you answering right now? And I'm
Where
like,
are we?
I'm answering the one that you've not asked yet, but you're going to.
But I can flick my eyes to the left. I can see something will jump off the page, and boom, we're up and running again. But then, I've done episodes where I've prepped so much. The ones I've been nervous about, I've prepped so much, and then I can feel myself almost like trying to control the conversation. You know, like it's like I know it's particularly with people with profile, because you tend to have heard them say stuff, and it's like, wouldn't it be great if they told me that story on my podcast, right? So it's like I have to hold back from like leading them down the alleyway. I usually find I make a page worth of notes, and by the end of it, I go, I did not, other than hello and when's your book out. They're the only 2 things on my notes that I've gone near, and the rest just goes. And it's finding that balance. I love the idea that 2 people can sit down and have a conversation. And if me and you talking today, if we'd have done it 6 months ago or a year in the future, it probably would be completely different. This is what it is, and then it will go out there. And I really like that idea, but also being okay with that idea is quite uncomfortable for me, because when I'm recording, I want it to be perfect, and I want to ask all the things I want. And sometimes it'll keep me up at night if I've missed a question. If I meant to ask them about that and I didn't ask, like, now the way that my brain works, something will pop into my head and I'll go, oh, that episode I recorded 60 episodes ago. I cannot believe I did not ask him about his community. You know, like, you know, I could name specific instances where that's happened, where it sits on my shoulder. So yeah, it's all just a bit of a mess really, but plugging in, pressing record and just going for it. I think there's a lot to be said for just trusting your own innate ability. I was like, I think, hang on a minute. I can chat to people. Like, it's just a chat, isn't it? It's just a chat. I can chat to people, you know?
It depends for me how specific the topic is that the person's coming on. And also it depends on the guest. Some guests, you ask one question and then that's it. And I love that, actually. I prefer that over the ones that give the short answers. Like one of the hardest, it's okay if it's gone all weird pastely, is, can you still hear me?
Yeah, still got you. Okay. He'll come back in a
cool. We've put some cool visual effects in for this point in the podcast, but some of the hardest ones I've had before have actually been with people who've had radio training, and they're so used to answering, like they've got to fit into a 5-minute soundbite, and they've got this really interesting charity, for example, and I've got loads of things that I want to ask, and they're used to answering for the radio. And then it's like, okay, 20 minutes into a 1-hour episode and I've run out of things to ask this person. That's happened. And as admittedly, I'll even say who it was, because I don't think she'd be mad at me. It was Debbie from Sean's Place. It was Sean's Place for a charity in Liverpool where...
I've got Debbie on next week.
Yeah. Oh, amazing. Yeah. Oh, God. And I'm going to have extra questions. She's really quick with her answers, but she's used to being on like Radio Merseyside and literally just, I've got to get as much information into this time as I possibly can. And I wasn't prepared for that. And I was, because the mental health marathon, I did the 26 podcast episodes in a row. That was for Sean's Place. That I was raising money for them.
Oh,
and
sick.
She was about 3 or 4. She was about 3 or 4 in, and I was like, and because we have a live chat in the podcast while it's happening as well, which I'm not looking at all now, because I've got a system now where if they send me a question, I'll read them later. But I used to read it in line as we were going in case people were commenting and stuff. And people in chat were like, he doesn't seem like he's doing very well. And I'm like, don't say that. and then I'm there like internally panicking and the whole thing. And it was fine. We just ended up talking about other stuff for another sort of 25 minutes. And then I had a break every hour to kind of make sure that I was safe for those 26. But yeah, in terms of guests, has there been anyone that's surprised you, like where their story ended up being like really surprising, or they, you had expectations one way and it went a completely different direction?
Probably a standout for me. I think of this episode a lot. Of references a lot. I spoke to the comedian Juliet Burton.
Oh, I love Juliet.
Yeah, she's wicked, eh? And she, at one point, Juliet had like 13 different mental health diagnoses, right? And a lot of her comedy to that point had been about her mental illness. So I kind of, in my head, I kind of thought, I know where this is going, right? So we're going to ask her, I'm going to chat to her about the process of diagnosis and, laughing about comedy and that whole thing about something being really sad, but making a joke about it. And, like it felt like it was going to be a pretty straightforward thing. And it wasn't like that at all. And, when we spoke, Juliet she'd been going through some stuff and she'd been working really, really hard. And she just came with this like sage-like wisdom, and so much of it was applicable to me that you could just hear my mind blowing through this episode. And I actually, at that point, I'd been on a break from therapy at that point, and after that episode I got a new therapist that went back in. I actually stopped taking my medication. Like, it just changed so much for me, because I just realized that we talked a lot, how did she explain it, performative surface level engagement.
Right.
And I realized that I'd been distracting myself from talking about my mental health by talking about my mental health. So I just had this like moment where I was like, I've been fucking lying here. And I can sit there and say, oh yeah, I got sick after my son, was born and all this sort of stuff. And it's not, that's my story. But I say that as a way into like digging into that story, right? So that was a huge one, and that didn't go anywhere I thought it would. And it was one afterwards I was like, I think I need to go for a lie down. And it changed. Yeah, it changed. Massive changes for me. Yeah, it was huge for me, that episode.
Yeah, she's been on my guest list for a little while. We've not managed to make it happen yet. But I caught her through because I know you're friends with John Salmon, and I was on their What's Going On in Your Head live shows a couple of times, or during the podcast during the pandemic.
Cool, yeah.
And so I met Juliet through there, and she did some stand up about it then, and then I was just had to go and watch all the rest of the stuff, and it's just. She does it so well, like, because stand-up comedy around mental health can be very, very. It's you have to be careful with it, but at the same time, to do comedy right, you have to be carefree, and she does the whole thing just fantastically. The one kind of surprise that I got from listening to yours, I think, was the episode with Scary Guy. Like, obviously, I've just seen the photos of him, and I'd never actually come across him before your podcast episode. In fact, yours was the one that introduced me. Your podcast actually introduced me to a lot of people, and it was like listening to him talk about like the house and bringing the homeless person in, or the not homeless person, but she was suffering from a traumatic brain injury and looked homeless, and a lot of people, and talking about the house. And I'm like thinking to myself, oh, this must be like somewhere in London and all the rest of it. And then he goes, it's in Wigan. And when he said Wigan, I'm like, did that American person really say Wigan? Because I always say there's hardly anything going on in the Northwest. And there is now, because I remember about 4 years ago, just before I met people like Debbie at Sean's place and stuff, and there was a Mallet in the community who are called Dramatic Recovery now, and there's a day, an hour for others as well. There's quite a lot of stuff going on in Liverpool, but I was beginning to find bits and pieces of things that were going on in Bolton and stuff, and it's like, but there really wasn't much in the Northwest, and it looked like stuff was all happening down south, like where, like, you know, Paul McGregor and Johnny Benjamin and people like that were doing all of their work. All of that seemed to be down south. And then I'm like, this thing is in Wigan. It's like what? Like you move from America, you're doing these things where you're picking up litter to chat to locals, like local kids, about looking after their area. I'm like, this must be like in like, you know, some like Ealing or somewhere. It's like, it's got to be, and no, Wigan. So I'm like, right. Yeah. And then this, you know, I remember listening to it several weeks back, and I was just like, I should go and chat to this guy. He's like, you know, a 40-minute drive away from me. I'm in Lancashire. In fact, not even 40 minutes, half an hour. So like, I'm like, yeah, and I was just like, and then I forgot, but I've just remembered it because I'm talking to you. This is one of those moments that I wish I had notes that I could come back to, because I've just gone so tangential.
Oh, mate. Well, I think Scary Guy, if you turned up at Wigan and like knocked on his door, I think he'd just probably have you in for a cup of tea. I think that seems to be his vibe.
Yeah, I know. That's what I'm thinking of doing.
just I mean,
he literally gives the address out on your podcast, and he's like, come on over. And I was like, what? I'm like, I mean, it's something that as Brits we don't quite understand, I guess. But it was really, really interesting when hearing him talk about the projects he does and what he does. It was fantastic. And again, for people who are just listening, or even the ones who are watching, like, he's called Scary Guy for a reason. It's like, look up pictures of him. It's like, I'm reasonably covered in tattoos, but you can barely even see any of mine right now. But it's like, he's full on face tattoos, you know, like red painted, like mohawk and stuff. He's wild, but he's a very, very down to earth and very vulnerable guy when you hear him talking. So
yeah, most amazing voice. I think, if you know, he's got a podcast that's really good, but I also think he should start another podcast where he like reads bedtime stories for adults or something. I could well handle like falling asleep to Scary Guy reading me nursery rhymes or something, man. That would be that'd be sick.
Yeah. Who would be, if you could pick anyone from any time, like any time period, alive or dead, who would be your top 3 guests that you'd love to have a conversation with, and what would you talk to them about?
Oh, mate, there we go. That's a big one, isn't it?
We had this as the topic of the stream last Friday, so everyone in my community was answering it, and then I had to answer it as well. So it was it's kind of like a bit of an obsession of mine at the minute.
Yeah, it's tricky, isn't it? Because there's ones that I suppose, do you want to speak to someone? Am I thinking of someone to speak to because I'm really interested, or would it be like a good chat, but also for the profile, right? So there's a couple of different ways of looking at it. So I don't know, the immediate name, everyone wants to talk to like one of the really big names in mental health, someone like Tyson Fury, or someone like that. I happen to know that Tyson Fury costs 25 grand.
I was going to say, I know how to get hold of Tyson Fury if you're interested. Yeah. It's just, because maybe we got NHS discount because we got offered it for 20 grand.
Right, okay, yeah. So yeah, I know someone who had him on their podcast and it was 25 bags. But, someone like that, someone, or like Stephen Fry, one of the OG mental health advocates. Because like when I first, I'll have to get my list out somewhere. When I first sat down, I was like, right, we're going to get some guests, and I was like, who do I know who speaks about mental health? I didn't know anyone. Like no one at all. And those were the sort of people I was thinking, I wonder if you can like get hold of Stephen Fry, or things like that.
Yeah.
Stephen Fry would be great, wouldn't he? Someone like
he
that.
Was historically. I think I had this conversation a few years back, and he was on my list then, and he only got moved off my list because we were. If I had a complete list, he'd probably be number 4. But my list one would be my dad, because I lost him when I was 19, and I've resolved most of my daddy issues with therapy now, but I wouldn't mind resolving them directly at the source. But Stephen Fry got replaced by Robin Williams on my list recently. And then the third person I chose was Derren Brown, because I actually think that Derren Brown, even though it wasn't mental health, it was mentalism. He was the person that got me interested in thinking about how the mind worked outside of just berating myself for how my mind works.
Yeah, that would be an interesting one. I'm a bit scared of Derren Brown. I always think like if real life was a movie, he'd be an incredible like supervillain.
He would, but I think it's about he uses his powers mostly for good, for entertainment first and good second. It's that is something scary about him, is the fact that all of what he knows and can do could just easily be used for manipulation. And I think he admits to the fact that he did use it for kind of roguish purposes when he was younger and just trying to make some money. Thankfully, Channel 4 made an entertainer out of him, and then part of his whole ethos became exposing the tricks that you can use and showing people not only this is what I do, but here's how I do it, which I've always kind of respected about him.
Yeah, that's cool, man. That's cool. Yeah, using his powers for good. I don't know, there's something quite villainous about it. I was feeling like the good guy, you just want them to be like, I don't know, a ninja, or like a bit more sort of a bit more like physically expressive maybe, and then the bad guy does all the sneaky mental stuff. But anyway,
sorry, this is a full-on tangent and I'm hijacking your answer, and I promise I will come back to it. But I had a similar conversation with have you ever met Multiplicity in Me?
No.
Multiplicity in Me has dissociative identity disorder, and I think has 5 alters within the system. And basically, she was on talking about that and talking about the film Split, and how obviously for the dissociative identity disorder, and obviously that's used as what's called multiple personality disorder, which is a phrase that isn't used, but that was what it was referred to.
Right.
And it was as a villain. And we had an interesting conversation about this, is the fact that with representation, that we need. In fact, actually, I think you were saying on your most recent episode, the woman who talks about language, literally listened to it this morning, can't remember her name, you were talking about it's always the person with schizophrenia. Actually, no, it's not. It's from the person from Simple Politics you had this conversation with.
Tatton, yeah,
that's the one. And you were saying it's always the schizophrenic, that's always the villain and stuff. And because you were talking about Carrie from. Because I remember you were talking about Carrie from Homeland and saying, is that an accurate representation of bipolar? For me, by the way, she wasn't an accurate representation of my bipolar, but what's his name? DeLuca from Grey's Anatomy was. So there are, anyway, so many tangents going on in my brain right now. I will, but anyway, we were talking about this, and she was saying they shouldn't be villains, and I was like, they shouldn't just be villains. People with mental health conditions shouldn't just be villains. What we need because we shouldn't be excluded from being villains either. It's and she was like, oh yeah, and because I said, imagine a world where actually where someone waves a magic wand and mental health is always depicted as the hero. That's it, 100% of the time, and we're never the villain. I think about how many shows that people love. The villains are some of the most iconic characters, and that it's people love Disney villains. People loved to hate Ramsay from Game of Thrones, people, or in fact anyone from Game of Thrones really. It's the people love to hate the villains. And I think that actually what we actually do need is we need way more representation of this is a person with this condition and they're good and they're okay and they're fine. But coming back to the point you made there about the fact that the villain, or sorry, the hero should always be someone doing physical stuff. This was the motive behind me doing these mental health marathon podcast things, because anytime I worked with people that were charity fundraising, they were always charity fundraising doing physical endurance. They'd be raising money for mental health charities, but it was always physical endurance. They'd run a marathon, they'd do the 3 peaks, they'd do something like that. And we've learned, you go into schools, and you may have heard Paul McGregor talk about this and stuff. It's like you talk go into schools and you say, what's the first thing you think of with physical health? And people say exercise, diet, training. Who's someone you think of when you think of physical health? And people say, like, Usain Bolt, like, The Rock, someone strong or someone fast. Then you say, what's the first thing you think of with mental health? And people say depression, anxiety, suicide. Who's someone that you think of? Robin Williams, Chester Bennington. We don't think of anybody in a positive way about mental health. When we think mental health, the people that pop to mind. And I was like, what if I did a mental endurance event? Like, how about if I did that instead? Like, and what we do is we have, we normalize open and honest mental health conversations by having open and honest mental health conversations. I'm totally stealing your lines. We do that for 26 straight hours. And a lot of people thought it was good. And a lot of people thought that I shouldn't be doing that with mental health because sleep deprivation is really, really bad for you. And I'm like, but so's actually, you look at, Surname's Orange, the one I listened to yesterday, staying up and doing 7 marathons in 7 days and getting that sleep deprivation there's probably not good for your mental health in the short term either, but what you're doing is the greater good. So yeah, I do agree that, but why not have the hero as someone who isn't motivation just positive manipulation? Inspiration, isn't it just positive manipulation? It's like we see these things like Derren Brown having these powers, and he could use them for good and does use them for good in a lot of ways. But it's like people often say they frown upon those tools and that the persons could be dangerous and stuff. And I'm like, yeah, they could be. But like, so can anyone with a fist or anyone with a foot. Someone could kick a person with a foot or kick a football with a foot. Someone could hurt a person with a fist or play guitar with a fist. It's like, it's down to what you use it for.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense, man. makes a lot of sense, yeah.
So anyway, your other 2 people.
Yeah. I don't know. I don't think I've got an answer for that, Dave. Right, leave it with me. We'll circle back on that without sort of 5 minutes of airtime of me going, which isn't great listening. Yeah, leave it with me. That one. I'm not sure is the answer. I don't think there's not anyone particularly, that I kind of think, I'd love to, because even people, it'd be great to talk to Stephen Fry, but it'd also be great if I don't. I don't really care. I don't really care about Tyson Fury either. Some people it would be nice to, and other people it would be.
I totally get the whole profile thing. Again, again, when you're doing an event like when I had the 26 or 36 people on in the space of a day, I tried to split it 12, 12, 12. And 12 was basically advocates. 12 was members of our community that just have lived experience, but they don't consider themselves advocates. They're just people with a story, which to me makes you an advocate anyway. But people who actively work as advocates, people who maybe haven't found their voice yet. And I wanted 12 high profile, because what you're trying to do is raise money for charity. What you're trying to do is raise awareness of mental health. And as much as I hate the fact that this is the way the world works, to be perfectly honest, but look at the Paddy Pimblett clip, right? Where if your mate's having a bad time, go back and put your arm around him and just give him a chat and see how you're doing. Viral as anything. Like one of the most viral clips of last year is him saying that. I'm going to get so much hate from my fellow Scousers now, because my Scousers think I've not got a Scouse accent anymore because I lived in Lancashire since I was 15. But that clip went absolutely everywhere. And I've said this for years, that if someone huge with a massive platform just tweeted out just said mental health matters, or talk about your mental health or something, that would achieve a huge amount of virality. But in fact, you said something similar on an episode recently, which was something along the lines of that the impact or reach, your reach, not impact. You said your reach isn't who you're actually reaching. It's how many people you've reached, but it's not how many people you're reaching. You said some variation of that. And I believe the same thing, that your reach doesn't equal your impact. You could have a post that goes to one person and impacts that person. You could have a post that goes to 1,000 people and doesn't impact them. But the reality of the world is that we do actually need to play the game a little bit of working with people with higher profiles, and their story might not be as relatable to many people, and their story might not be as powerful. But what happens is your story's power gets multiplied by your influence. So a moderately okay mental health story with a couple of nice points in it, multiplied by the influence of a following of 1 million, tends to end up being more than the person with the best mental health story in the world that gets to an audience of 10. And it's sad but true, but as podcast hosts, we do need to think about it. I have got another actual question for you. My chat are literally poking fun at me. I've looked over there saying that they're telling me that I'm hijacking my own podcast too much. Basically, so your day job, you work in, is it physio, or is it you work in some form of recovery?
Kind of, yeah. I have a quite weird job that I've invented, basically. But it's in the physical health space, sport specific rehab, pain management, mobility, flexibility, that type of stuff.
How do those two things overlap, that and mental health?
They do and they don't. So how we experience pain and our mental health are really, really linked. A lot of people that I work with in my day job, pain has overtaken to their life to the point where they feel like a spectator in it. And it can often be the frustration of living with pain is worse than experiencing the pain itself. So, and it can change the way how you think about yourself and the amount of just your quality of life, really, right? Because you can't do all this stuff, and then you beat yourself up for not being able to do the stuff. So there's that element of it. A lot of pain work as well is about confidence. People lose confidence in their body and they become trapped in this little sort of, the only way they can stay pain-free is to not move very much. And it's kind of working out how to make them confident enough to try, so there's that kind of crossover to it a lot. So in how people see themselves and how much they get out of their day to day, there's some sort of crossover, I've never really thought about it, if I'm being quite honest. But yeah, with regards to my podcast and stuff, it's not, I mention it sometimes because it's relevant, but there's no, it's like having two different jobs, really. It's kind of how I've kind of got two part-time jobs, really, is how I see it.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's a lot of emotion around pain, a lot of emotion. And we know that pain, things like fear feeds pain, stress feeds pain. One of the most important things I always say is that pain is no indication of damage. Just because something really hurts doesn't mean there's anything wrong with it. Pain is neurological. There's no pain center in the brain. It's neurological. It's a conversation between your body and your nervous system, and your brain's trying to make the best of it and deciding that something needs to be protected. And pain is what protects it. So if we can kind of interrupt that system, then we can turn the pain signals down. But obviously that affects a lot of how people see themselves and think about themselves.
Yeah. I mean, chronic pain is something that comes up a lot in our community as well. And I think there's a lot of overlap with the mental health community and the disability community and the invisible illness community. It's, obviously any form of other disability or injury can lead into your mental health, and a lot of it's that getting the person moving in the first place. One of our community, Petra Phoenix, she's also a streamer as well. She's a crafter, and she's just an awesome person to talk to. And she said that she's got to get used to the fact that with herself that she's kind of she hurts if she does and she hurts if she doesn't, but at least if she does, then she gets other benefits from that as well. And it's finding that right amount of balance, because obviously if she overexerts it and then she's in an excessive amount of pain for several days, it goes back to that carrying the bag. If I don't put this bag down today, I have for 5 minutes, I have to put it down for 5 hours some other time. One of the things I like about your show is that you do tell us when pennies drop for you, like when things happen or when something clicks for you, because I actually feel like we get taken along on a little bit of a journey, like with you there. It's like, and sometimes actually your realization like adds to that conversation as well, because the penny might be just ready to drop for me, and then you say something, I'm like, it's dropped fully now. Has there been any like absolute favorite penny drop moments for you?
Yeah, that's a very, very good question. Yeah, there's been a few. I kind of think that I don't have any sort of formal mental health training or so. Like, I'm just a guy who had a breakdown and tried to kill himself and didn't, and then started talking about it to people. That's it. That's the extent of my. So I'm still learning. So I ask questions that I think sometimes people are scared to ask questions because they're scared of looking a bit daft, or they're scared of getting it wrong, particularly when we're talking about more complex aspects of like mental health. And so I just ask the questions. That I don't care about looking daft or getting it wrong. I've got, my intentions are good, and I'm willing to like address any of my ignorances, right? So how else am I going to know? So I think I get penny dropping moments because I just kind of steam in a little bit like that. I don't know. I spoke to probably one just because it happened very, very recently. I spoke to Josh Fletcher, Anxiety Josh.
Yep.
He is on Instagram, and he was talking a lot about anxiety. And he kind of like, I'm surprised he didn't invoice me for a session by the end of it. I felt a bit beaten up by it, to be honest. I'm still thinking about it now. But yeah, and he was talking about like anxiety and how we feed anxiety. And I kind of realized that a lot of the ways that I was living in a way to try and take care of myself were actually feeding my underlying anxiety. And that was a bit of a moment because I kind of thought I'd got past all of that. I kind of thought that I was doing pretty well with it. And then I was it's made me just have a rethink about some of my strategies and why they're my strategies and how effective are they. And yeah, that rocked my boat a little bit. I'll be honest, I keep going back to that. Was one of those episodes that went somewhere I wasn't expecting.
Yeah.
And I've had a lot of good feedback about that one, but I felt uncomfortable putting it out. I always want to stay true to my show, and I don't edit, and they just go out.
Yeah.
And even if I think I've done a terrible job, which is probably on most of them, to be honest, there's only about 4 or 5 where I think I smashed that. I'll put them out anyway, and just like I suffer for it. Putting them out. even if someone wouldn't listen and go like, "Oh, he's not doing a good job there," I hear it. When I listen back, I think, "Oh my God, you've fluffed this." And I felt like that about Josh's, and I got to the end, and I was like, "Oh, that's kind of knocked me for 6." But that really got me thinking.
It was an absolutely fantastic episode.
Oh, thank you.
Like there was I don't know if it was the same thing that caused a penny dropper for you as it was for me, really, because mine came a little bit early. But you said, because when you said then about it being about various things, it was when you were talking about the coffee, and he was saying that actually, because I acknowledged years back my worst ever panic attack. It was interesting when he said something like his worst, he doesn't panic when he's on stage in front of X amount of people. He panics when he's got to buy 5 items from Asda. I'm like, Yep, been there. My worst ever panic attack was in the gym, but it wasn't actually a panic attack. It was an overcaffeination. I was an Olympic lifter at the time, and we were doing Big Friday just before Christmas, like the Christmas lift off, wearing Christmas jumpers for the warm-ups and everything. And then basically you're only working on 2 lifts for Olympic lifting. You're working on the clean and jerk and the snatch. They're both very rude sounding lifts. It's great. And I had this strong pre-workout before the first lift, and then we do all our mobilization, do the first lift, and then I was like, and I got PBs, and I'm like, I'm having another scoop before the second one. And whilst I was in the gym and I had stuff to focus on, and I had the lifts to focus on, I got PBs, it was great. Like, whilst I had all that to focus on, and I was doing something with all of that extra illusion of energy, I was fine. But as soon as we finished, everything just felt wrong. And like the person on reception was like, "You okay?" I'm like, "No, everything's wrong." And I was just like, everything is wrong. And then my wife was out to their Christmas do that night, and I'm like, "I need you to come home." And she's like, "I can't come home." She's like, I'm like, I need you to come home. And I was just like, she's like, "I can't come home." I'm like, "Right, well, I'm taking myself to hospital then." And I took myself off to hospital. And basically I was just in the waiting room, just having like the worst panic attack of my life. And then thankfully there was a long wait that day, because apparently I wasn't. I was just really over-caffeinated and I just needed to wait for it to stop. And when it stopped, because the over-caffeinated feels exactly the same. It's like palms are sweaty, vomit on your sweater already, mum's spaghetti. He looks calm, but on the surface he looks calm and ready to drop bombs. See, I told you we were having a rap battle today. I knew it'd happen. But basically it did pass, and I was sat there still thinking I was like totally going to die and everything. And since then, I've been more careful with my caffeine, but to a very regimented amount. Like I still have pre-workout. I'll have it, but it's before I'm training. I wouldn't have it if I'm not training, and I still have that. And and on top of that, I might have 1 or maybe 2 at most cups of coffee a day, and I'll stop at 4. And when he was saying that, okay, if you're saying I can't have a coffee now because it will make me anxious, that is actually the point of which you're letting yourself be fearful of that, and you're saying that coffee and being over caffeinated is something to be afraid of. And I was just like, oh, it's another layer more complicated than I even gave it credit for. It's like, why? I thought I had this one worked out.
Yeah, I felt a bit like some of those things. I think it's a bit like when you watch a movie like The Matrix or Interstellar, and afterwards you go, I understand that, but if someone asked me to explain my understanding of it, I couldn't tell you what just happened.
Yeah.
That's how I felt after I came away from Josh. I was like, something shifted here, but I couldn't quite tell you how I feel about it. I'm still not sure.
Well, sometimes when we listen to them or be part of them ourselves, we think that was like, it wasn't my best work. We know what our best work is, and we know when we're in flow, so we know when we're out of flow. And it doesn't always come across to the audience. And to me, that episode was just like standout good. And that was one of the reasons why I brought this question up, because I know that in that one you talk about the fact that the penny dropped for you, and I was like, yeah, actually, I was like, I can think of like a couple of other times that's happened in an episode, in that I've been like, I really loved the way you summarized that there, and you reflected it back to kind of what you were getting from it. So I got a lot of value from that episode. And right, we're coming to the end of our time. Do you have an answer for the other 2 people? Did it come up, or if no, it's fine. It's fine. Is there anything you want to add that the questions didn't lead you towards?
Oh no, I don't think so. I think just sitting and talking about this stuff with no agenda other than to just talk about this stuff, I think is quite often where some of the most lovely learnings come from, and just there's something quite nice. I do think the magic happens when 2 people just talk, and there is no kind of agenda, and you're not trying to get anywhere, and you're not trying to, and you just find that rhythm of going back and forth. And it's a bit like therapy, and you sort of say something and afterwards you go, oh, didn't realize I was going to say that today, and it's something nice. And I think the power of conversation is not to be underestimated as the whole talking thing in mental health is a confusing thing at the moment. I think, telling people to talk and all the rest of it. But I think, just having a natter is a really useful place to kind of work some stuff out.
Okay, awesome. And finally, where is the best place for people to get in touch with you? Should they want to follow you, find out all your stuff?
The podcast you can get anywhere, Proper Mental. I suppose Instagram is my weapon of choice in social media. I struggle with social media. I'm not great at it. I'll sort of show up every day for a week and then go missing for a month. But yeah, if anyone wants to chat, send me an email. I always check my emails. But yeah, social media is weird. But yeah, that's it, man. That's me.
All right. Well, thank you very much. It's been an absolute pleasure chatting to you. I'm really glad to have got the opportunity. I'm also really glad that we managed to make it work for today on such short notice as well. Because I was in one of those nothing moments where I've got James Lindsay coming on soon, but I've told him not to come on until I've finished reading his book. And it's like, but the problem is because we've now not scheduled that. No, I'm not reading the book. I need to schedule him for like next week, and then as soon as that happens, that's all I'll do that weekend. I need a deadline, but it was really good to catch up with you and to basically chat about these things face to face.
Oh mate, yeah, thanks for having me, man. I was sick to to get asked. It was lovely. It was a lot of fun, man. That hour's gone quick. It's always a sign if it's fun if the hour goes quick, right?
Yeah, definitely.
What have you got next? Have you got like another 4 to go? You say?
No, I'm not doing any other interviews today. You're my only interview today. So basically we do mental health peer support. So we have a community of people that have various mental health conditions, various neurodivergencies, and people come in and ask for advice. That's again, I do education and advice as my day job. So I always say this and like hope that my bosses at the NHS aren't listening. It's like what they pay me for, I do for free online. It's like, so we have conversations about it. And on a Tuesday, we call it emotional sandwich, because normally what we do is we have an hour of mental health conversation, followed by an hour with a guest, followed by another hour of mental health conversation. And the joke is that the conversation is the bread, you're the filling, and I'm the butter that holds it all together.
Oh,
what? I kind of love it, but hate it at the same time. In fact, someone's just put the sandwiches all over the screen, which is quite nice. And then on a Thursday, we do something called Fill Your Cup Thursday, which is basically a little bit more motivation, a little bit more meditation. We have a vibe which is called appropriate vibes only rather than positive vibes only, because we hate positive vibes only. But on a Thursday, we edge a little bit towards more positivity. And then on Friday, it was originally called World to Rights, but now it's called, what's it called? Story time, where we basically on voice call have members of the audience call in and answer a topic of the stream. So what we're doing today is we're combining all three into one day. So we've done emotional sandwich now, well, sort of. I've got to do the other slice of bread now. I've got to go back. We've got to do an hour of check-in. And then at that point, at the midpoint, we're going to do some meditation, and just mainly to calm me down, really. But I'm sure the chat will love it too. And then after that, we're changing the topic. Instead of me asking them a question, I'm opening up the Discord voice call, and anyone from our community can come on and ask me anything that they want to.
Sick.
So we're reversing that. I may have to do some of the stream in a face mask, as in like a mint julep face mask, not like a protect you from sickness face mask. I may have to stuff my face full of marshmallows. I might have to draw. We've got lots. Because we're raising money for charity. We're raising money for an American-based charity called Hope for the Day, and that basically provide mental health intervention and prevention in I think it's 26 different countries. And we're raising money for them today. So we've got milestones for if we hit various things.
Oh, mate.
Including live poetry readings. We're going to write a song or a poem about a specific topic if we get to a certain amount. So because I'm recording the podcast and the podcast has a specific format, none of the charity stuff's on the screen at the minute. So I've no idea what's happened in the last hour. So I'll either go back to no donations or Dave, you've got to put 46 marshmallows in your mouth and say chubby bunnies. So I have 2 bags of marshmallows literally to my left for this now. Hopefully
Nice.
2 bags will be enough. So yeah, it's been great to have you as a part of this as well. So thank you very much.
Mate, yeah, that's really cool. Yeah, it sounds like you got a lot of cool stuff going on, man. That's awesome. Yeah, thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
We try. Thank you again, and I will catch you soon.